A millionaire offered $1 million to a poor virgin waitress to spend a night with his son. However, he was paralyzed by what his son did. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Olivia Brooks wiped down table 6 for the third time in 10 minutes, her movements mechanical, practiced. The coffee stains never really came out anymore. They'd become part of the table's character, just like the exhaustion had become part of hers. "Order up," Danny called from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates across the pass, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Wednesday special. Same as every Wednesday for the past 3 years. Olivia grabbed the plates, forcing a smile as she approached the elderly couple in booth 3. "Here you go, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. Extra gravy on the side, just how you like it." Mrs. Patterson's weathered hand patted Olivia's arm gently. "You're such a sweet girl, dear. How's your mother doing?" The question hit like it always did, a small punch to the gut wrapped in genuine concern. "She's hanging in there. Thank you for asking. You tell Susan we're praying for her," Mr. Patterson added, his voice gruff with emotion. Olivia nodded, the practiced smile wavering slightly. "I will. She'll appreciate that." She turned away before they could see the tears threatening to spill. 3 years of this routine. 3 years of well-meaning questions and pitying looks. 3 years since everything fell apart. The bell above the door chimed, and Olivia glanced up to see Jake Morrison sliding into his usual spot at the counter. Construction worker, decent guy, always left a good tip. He'd been asking her out for months, but Olivia couldn't afford distractions. Not when Mom needed her. Not when there was still so much left undone. "The usual, Jake?" she asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. "You know it. And maybe you'll finally say yes to dinner." His grin was hopeful, genuine. "Maybe when things slow down," she replied. The same answer she'd given him 50 times before. Jake's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "I'll keep asking." The afternoon dragged on like they all did. Endless refills, forced conversations, and the constant ache in her feet that had become her faithful companion. By 5 o'clock, Murphy's was mostly empty except for a few regulars nursing their coffee and avoiding going home. "You heading out, Liv?" Danny asked, untying his apron. "Yeah, gotta get to the hospital before visiting hours end." "Tell your mom I said hi." Olivia grabbed her jacket from the back room. Checking her phone as she walked to her beat-up Honda Civic, 2 missed calls from Dr. Martinez. Her stomach dropped. The doctor never called unless... She dialed back immediately, her hand shaking as she fumbled with the keys. "Olivia, I'm glad you called back." Dr. Martinez's voice was carefully neutral, which somehow made it worse. "Is it bad news?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "We need to discuss your mother's treatment options. The current chemotherapy isn't responding as well as we'd hoped. There are some newer treatments available, but..." He paused, and Olivia knew what was coming. "They're significantly more expensive. Your insurance won't cover them." The world tilted slightly. "How much are we talking about?" "Around $50,000 for the full course. I know it's a lot, but these treatments have shown remarkable results in similar cases." $50,000. Olivia's annual salary from both jobs combined barely hit 30. She closed her eyes, leaning against her car in the diner's parking lot. "I'll figure it out," she said, though she had no idea how. "Take your time to think about it. We can schedule a consultation next week to go over everything in detail." After hanging up, Olivia sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the cracked windshield that she couldn't afford to fix. $50,000. It might as well have been 50 million. The drive to Mercy General took 20 minutes through evening traffic. 20 minutes for her mind to spiral through impossible scenarios, second mortgage on the house, if the bank would even approve it, loans she'd never qualify for, GoFundMe campaigns that might raise a few thousand if she was lucky. She found her mother in room 314, propped up in bed watching an old episode of The Price is Right. Susan Brooks had always been a beautiful woman, but the cancer had carved away at her, leaving behind sharp angles and hollow cheeks. Still, when she saw Olivia, her face lit up with the same warm smile that had gotten her through childhood scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. "There's my girl," Susan said, muting the television. "How was work?" "The usual, Mrs. Patterson sends her love." Olivia settled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair, the same one she'd occupied every evening for months. "She's such a sweetheart. Did I tell you she brought me those magazines last week? The ones with all the celebrity gossip?" Susan's laugh turned into a cough, and Olivia reached for the water pitcher. They talked about nothing important for an hour. The weather, the new nurse who looked like Susan's high school boyfriend, the terrible hospital food, normal mother-daughter conversation that felt precious because it might not last much longer. "You look tired, honey," Susan observed, her maternal radar still functioning despite everything. "I'm fine, Mom. Just been busy. You're working too hard. You need to have some fun. Maybe go out with that nice boy from the diner you mentioned." Olivia forced a smile. "Maybe." As visiting hours wound down, Susan grew quiet, staring out the window at the parking lot below. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said suddenly. The words hit like a physical blow. Olivia's throat tightened. "Mom, I mean it. The way you've taken care of everything. Taken care of me. He always said you had his strength." Olivia squeezed her mother's hand, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Robert Brooks had been everything good in the world. Patient, kind, hardworking, a man who'd never hurt anyone in his life. "I miss him," Susan whispered. "Me too." After kissing her mother goodnight, Olivia walked through the hospital corridors in a daze. The walls were lined with inspirational posters about healing and hope, but all she could think about was Dr. Martinez's phone call, $50,000. Her father's life insurance had barely covered the funeral, and a few months of medical bills. She was almost to the elevator when she saw him. Detective Ray Kowalski, the officer who'd handled her father's case. He was talking to another detective near the nurse's station. Probably hear about some other tragedy. "Detective Kowalski," she called out. He turned, and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "Olivia Brooks. How are you holding up, kid? I was wondering if there were any updates on my father's case." The detective's expression grew uncomfortable. "Listen, Olivia, I know this is hard to hear, but the case has been officially closed, after 3 years, with no new evidence. Closed." The word felt foreign in her mouth. "I'm sorry. I know how much this meant to you, but sometimes these things just don't have the ending we want." The elevator doors opened, and Olivia stepped inside, numb, closed, just like that. 3 years of hoping for justice, for answers, for something that made sense of her father's death. All closed. The drive home was a blur of red lights and growing rage. By the time she pulled into the driveway of their small ranch house, her hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. Inside, she went straight to her father's study, the room she'd left untouched since his death. His desk still held the same organized chaos of bills and work papers. His coffee mug, the one that said "World's Best Dad," sat exactly where he'd left it. She opened the bottom drawer, pulling out the thick folder she'd compiled over the past 3 years. Every police report she could get her hands on, every witness statement, every dead end. The hit and run that had taken Robert Brooks on a rainy Tuesday night 3 years ago remained officially unsolved. But Olivia had her suspicions. She spread the papers across the desk, studying them like she had 100 times before. The accident had happened on Maple Street, just 6 blocks from their house. Her father had been walking home from the community center where he volunteered, teaching ESL classes to immigrants. A witness had seen a dark luxury car speeding away, but the license plate was obscured by mud. The investigating officers had done their job, but something had always felt off. The case had gone cold unusually fast, and when Olivia had pressed Detective Kowalski for more information, he'd grown evasive. There were rumors, whispers from her father's friends at the community center, about certain families in town whose influence reached into places it shouldn't. One name kept coming up. Campbell, Gregory Campbell, owned half the commercial real estate in town and had his fingers in everything from the city council to the police benevolent fund. His son Tyler had a reputation for partying too hard and driving too fast. Olivia stared at the papers until the words blurred together. $50,000 for her mother's treatment. A closed case file. A system that protected the wealthy and powerful while ordinary people like her father became statistics. She closed the folder and walked to the kitchen, where she poured herself a glass of wine. Cheap stuff that burned going down. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening quiet. Families having dinner, kids doing homework, normal people living normal lives. But nothing about Olivia's life had been normal since that rainy Tuesday night. She raised her glass toward the darkness beyond the kitchen window, toward the injustice that seemed to permeate everything these days. "I'm not giving up, Dad," she whispered to the empty house. "I promise you that." The wine tasted like determination and desperation in equal measure. Tomorrow she'd go back to slinging coffee and smiling at customers who felt sorry for her. Tomorrow she'd visit her dying mother and pretend everything would be okay. But tonight, she made a promise to herself and to her father's memory. The Campbell family thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. The next morning came too early, announced by the aggressive beeping of Olivia's alarm clock at 5:30 a.m. She'd barely slept, her mind cycling through the same thoughts that had plagued her for 3 years. The difference was that now she had a deadline, her mother's life hanging in the balance, and a case file stamped closed that felt like a slap in the face. She dressed in the semi-darkness, pulling on her Murphy's Diner uniform, a polyester dress that had seen better days and sensible shoes that pinched her feet. In the kitchen, she made coffee strong enough to wake the dead and stared at her father's business card collection. Still magneted to the refrigerator, Robert had believed in networking, in treating everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. "Morning, Dad," she whispered, touching the card from Martinez Landscaping. Roberto Martinez had worked with her father on several community beautification projects. More importantly, his brother was a dispatcher at the police department. Her shift at Murphy's dragged until her lunch break. Instead of eating, Olivia drove to the small office park where Martinez Landscaping was located. She found Roberto trimming hedges behind the building, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. "Olivia." Roberto's face broke into a surprised smile. "How are you, mija? How's your mother?" "Hanging in there." "Thank you, Roberto. I need to ask you a favor. It's about my father's case." His smile faded. "Aye, Olivia. That was a terrible thing. Your papa was a good man. The police closed the case yesterday. No new evidence, they said." She took a breath. "But I can't let it go. Not when I know someone out there killed him and just walked away." Roberto set down his shears, studying her face. "What do you need?" "Your brother Carlos works dispatch, right? I was wondering if he might remember anything about that night. Anything that didn't make it into the official reports." "Carlos has a good memory," Roberto said slowly. "Too good sometimes? Gets him in trouble." 20 minutes later, Olivia found herself in a dim sports bar across from Carlos Martinez, a heavy-set man in his 50s, who looked like he carried the weight of every emergency call he'd ever handled. He nursed a beer while Olivia sipped coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. "I remember that night," Carlos said without preamble. "October 15th, 3 years ago. Rain coming down like God was angry about something. Do you remember the call coming in? Anonymous tip. Came in around 11:47 p.m. Female voice, sounded young, scared. Said there was a man down on Maple Street." Carlos's eyes narrowed. "But here's the thing. Dispatch log shows the call came in at 11:47, but the timestamp on the recording, that shows 11:52. Olivia's pulse quickened. 5 minutes difference. That's significant. Could be nothing. Could be somebody wanted to make sure their story lined up just right. Carlos leaned forward. There was something else. The responding officers, Henderson and Murphy. They got pulled off the case pretty fast. Next thing you know, it's handed over to Detective Kowalski, and he's got explicit instructions that this one comes from upstairs. Upstairs meaning Chief Morrison and Morrison. And he's got himself a nice boat that costs more than my annual salary, if you catch my drift. Olivia caught it. In a town like theirs, expensive toys usually meant somebody was supplementing their city paycheck. Carlos, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to cover up a hit and run, what would that look like? Carlos drained his beer. Hypothetically, you'd need to control the crime scene processing, make sure certain evidence never made it into the reports. You'd need dispatch records to get lost or modified, and you'd need the right detective assigned, someone who knows when to stop digging. And all of that would require money, a lot of money. The kind of money that regular folks don't have. Carlos stood up. "Olivia, I liked your father. Hell, he helped my kid with his college application essays. But if you're thinking about poking at this thing, you better be damn sure you're ready for what you might find." After Carlos left, Olivia sat in the bar's parking lot, her mind racing. 5 minutes. A compromised crime scene. a detective with orders from above. It wasn't proof, but it was a pattern. She drove to the public library, a building that had been modern sometime around 1985 and hadn't been updated since. The reference librarian, Mrs. Chen, was a fixture who seemed to know where every piece of information in the building was hiding. "I need to research local business owners," Olivia said. "Specifically, anyone who might have the influence to affect police investigations." Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. 20 minutes later, Olivia was surrounded by back issues of the Business Journal, city council meeting minutes, and society page clippings from the local newspaper. The Campbell name appeared everywhere. Gregory Campbell had built his empire from a single strip mall into a commercial real estate dynasty that dominated 3 counties. His developments bore names like Campbell Commons and Campbell Business Park. His donations funded the new police station, the mayor's re-election campaign, and the annual policeman's ball. But it was Tyler Campbell who caught Olivia's attention. The society pages painted a picture of a young man spiraling out of control. Dewey arrests that mysteriously disappeared from court records, bar fights that never resulted in charges, a pattern of reckless behavior that would have landed anyone else in jail. But somehow Tyler Campbell always walked away clean. The most recent article was from 6 months ago. Tyler had crashed his BMW into a fountain outside the country club. The article mentioned that he'd been taken to the hospital for evaluation, but gave no details about charges or legal consequences. Olivia photographed everything with her phone, building a digital case file that was probably useless in court, but painted a clear picture for anyone willing to look. The afternoon sun was setting by the time she left the library. Her second job at Romano's restaurant didn't start until 6, giving her an hour to drive past the Campbell estate. She'd done this before, but always at night, always careful to avoid being seen. The Campbell house wasn't really a house. It was a monument to wealth and power, sitting on 5 acres of manicured lawns in the most exclusive part of town. Iron gates, circular driveway, windows that probably cost more than most people's cars. Olivia parked across the street, using her phone to zoom in on the 3-car garage, a silver Mercedes, a black Range Rover, and an empty space where a third vehicle should be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Doctor wants to schedule another consultation tomorrow. Love you." The weight of everything crashed down on her at once. Her mother needed $50,000 for treatment that might save her life. Her father's killer was probably living in luxury behind those iron gates, and she was a 22-year-old waitress with 2 jobs and a used Honda Civic. But as she sat there watching the Campbell estate, something shifted inside her. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was finally accepting that the system wasn't going to deliver justice for people like her father. Her phone rang. Jake Morrison from the diner. "Hey, Olivia. I know this is probably a bad time, but I wanted to check on you. You seemed pretty upset earlier." Jake's kindness was genuine, but it made her feel even more isolated. How could she explain that she was sitting outside a mansion, planning something she couldn't even name yet? "I'm okay. Thanks for calling. Listen, I don't know what's going on, but if you need anything, I mean anything, you call me, all right?" After hanging up. Olivia stared at the Campbell estate until the security lights came on. Somewhere behind those perfectly landscaped gardens and expensive windows, Tyler Campbell was probably having dinner, watching TV, living his life without a care in the world. Meanwhile, her father was 6 feet underground, and her mother was dying in a hospital bed. The inequality of it burned in her chest like acid. She started her car and drove toward Romano's, where she'd spend the next 6 hours serving overpriced pasta to people who tipped her in spare change and complained about everything. But her mind wasn't on work anymore. For 3 years, she'd trusted the system to deliver justice. She'd believed that if she was patient enough, if she kept pushing, eventually the truth would come out. But systems protected people like the Campbells. They didn't protect people like her father, immigrants, working-class families, anyone who didn't have enough money to buy influence, if the system wouldn't deliver justice. Maybe she'd have to create her own. The thought scared her, but not as much as the alternative. Watching her mother die while her father's killer lived in luxury, untouchable and unpunished. By the time she reached Romano's, Olivia had made a decision that would change everything. She was done waiting for justice to find her. It was time to go looking for it herself. Tyler Campbell stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror of his penthouse apartment. watching his hands shake as he tried to shave. The tremor wasn't from age. At 28, he should be in his prime. It was withdrawal, pure and simple. He'd managed to stay sober for exactly 18 hours, a personal record for the past 6 months. The face looking back at him was a stranger's. Hollow cheeks, bloodshot eyes, the kind of pallor that came from too many nights spent at the bottom of a bottle. His father would have something to say about his appearance at today's board meeting. Gregory Campbell always had something to say. "Pull yourself together," he muttered, gripping the marble countertop until his knuckles went white. The pills in his medicine cabinet called to him. Xanax for the anxiety, Adderall to function, Ambien to sleep, a pharmaceutical cocktail that kept him floating just above rock bottom. But today, he needed to be sharp. Today, Gregory was announcing the new development project, and Tyler's presence was required as the heir apparent to the Campbell empire. His phone buzzed, a text from his father. "Conference room, 9 a.m. Don't be late. No. Good morning. No. Hope you're feeling better. Just commands." Like Tyler was another employee rather than his only son. The shower helped marginally. The expensive Italian suit helped more. By the time Tyler walked into Campbell Development's glass and steel headquarters, he looked almost human, almost like someone who belonged in a boardroom making decisions about millions of dollars. "Tyler," Gregory's voice cut across the conference room like a blade. "You look like hell." "Good morning to you too, Dad." The other board members, mostly older men in equally expensive suits, avoided eye contact. They'd witnessed these father-son confrontations before, and experience had taught them to become invisible. Gregory Campbell commanded the room without effort. At 55, he was still imposing. Silver hair perfectly styled, posture that suggested military training, eyes that missed nothing. He'd built his empire through a combination of vision, ruthlessness, and an understanding that in small-town politics, money was the only vote that really mattered. "The Riverside project will break ground next month," Gregory announced, clicking to the next slide. $15 million in development costs, projected ROI of 30% over 5 years. Tyler tried to focus on the presentation, but his mind kept wandering. The Riverside project would displace a dozen small businesses, including the community center where that man had volunteered, the one from the accident. He forced the thought away, but it lingered like smoke in his lungs. "Tyler will be overseeing the final permitting process," Gregory continued, and Tyler's attention snapped back to the room. "I will, unless you have somewhere more important to be." The question dripped with disdain. After the meeting, Tyler found himself alone with his father in the executive office that had always felt more like a throne room. Gregory poured himself a scotch, 18-year-old single malt that probably cost more than most people made in a week. "You're embarrassing me," Gregory said without preamble. You're trying, Jesus Christ, Tyler. You're 28 years old when I was your age. I'd already built 3 shopping centers and married your mother." Tyler's jaw tightened. "Mom left because of what you built, not despite it." The slap came so fast Tyler barely saw it coming. His cheek burned, but he didn't touch it. He'd learned long ago not to show weakness around Gregory Campbell. "Your mother left because she was weak," Gregory said, his voice deadly calm. "Just like you're weak. The difference is, I invested too much in you to write you off." Tyler stared at his father, feeling the familiar cocktail of rage and shame that had defined their relationship for as long as he could remember. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to stop being a disappointment. I want you to take some responsibility for the family name." Gregory moved to the window, looking out at the city he'd helped shape. "There's a charity gala next weekend, the hospital fundraiser you'll attend. You'll be charming. And you'll convince everyone that the Campbell family is still worth their respect. And if I refuse," Gregory smiled, but there was no warmth in it, "you won't refuse, because if you do, I'll cut off your trust fund, kick you out of that apartment I pay for, and you can see how long you survive in the real world." Tyler left the office, feeling like he'd been skinned alive. In the elevator, he caught his reflection again. The red mark on his cheek had faded, but the humiliation hadn't. 28 years old, and his father still treated him like a misbehaving child. His hands found the flask in his jacket pocket without conscious thought. The vodka burned going down, but it quieted the voice in his head that whispered, he deserved everything his father said about him. the voice that reminded him what he'd done 3 years ago on a rainy Tuesday night. By the time Tyler reached his apartment, the flask was empty, and the world had taken on that soft-edged quality that meant the alcohol was working. He poured another drink, top shelf everything, because if you were going to destroy yourself, you might as well do it with style. The accident played in his mind like a broken movie reel. Rain on the windshield, the music too loud, the blur of motion in his peripheral vision, and then the sickening thud that would haunt him forever. He'd stopped the car 3 blocks away, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. One call to his father, voice breaking as he confessed what he'd done. Gregory had been there within 20 minutes, along with Marcus Webb, the family lawyer who specialized in making problems disappear. "Did anyone see you?" Gregory had demanded. "I don't know. Maybe. There was a woman walking her dog, but she was across the street. License plate." "What? Was your license plate visible? Any damage to the front of the car?" Tyler had been crying by then, great gasping sobs that made it hard to speak. "Dad, there was a man. I think I killed someone." Gregory's face had gone stone cold. "You didn't kill anyone. You had dinner with me at the club tonight, remember? We stayed late, talked about business. Marcus can verify that. But there are no buts, Tyler. You listened to me very carefully. You were never on Maple Street tonight. You were never driving this car. As far as anyone knows, this vehicle has been in the garage all evening. The cover-up had been frighteningly efficient. The BMW disappeared to a private garage across state lines, where it was repaired and repainted. Tyler's alibi was airtight. Security cameras at the country club had been adjusted to show him leaving later than he actually had. A sizable donation to the Police Benevolent Fund ensured that the investigation would be thorough, but not too thorough. For 3 years, Tyler had lived with the knowledge that he'd killed an innocent man and gotten away with it because his last name was Campbell. For 3 years, he'd been slowly drowning himself in alcohol and pills, trying to forget the sound of impact, the way the body had crumpled in his headlights. His phone rang, jolting him back to the present. Unknown number. "Hello? Tyler Campbell. Who's asking? My name is Sarah Chen. I work events for the Meridian Group. We're organizing the hospital charity gala next weekend. And I understand you'll be attending." Tyler rubbed his temples. Of course. Gregory had already put the wheels in motion. "That's right. Wonderful. I was hoping we could meet this week to discuss your family's involvement in the event. Perhaps Thursday afternoon." "Fine, whatever." Tyler was about to hang up when something occurred to him. "How did you get this number?" "Your father's office provided it. I hope that's all right." After ending the call, Tyler stared at his phone. Another obligation. Another performance where he'd have to pretend to be the successful heir everyone expected him to be. Another night of shaking hands with people who thought the Campbell name meant something noble. He poured another drink and walked to his balcony, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there was a family still grieving the man he'd killed. Somewhere was a wife, maybe children, who went to bed every night wondering why their loved one had to die. Tyler raised his glass in a mocking toast to the darkness. "To the Campbell family legacy," he whispered, "built on blood and maintained through silence." The vodka had lost its bite, but it still burned as it went down, just like the guilt that no amount of alcohol could wash away. He'd been living on borrowed time for 3 years, pretending to be human while knowing he was nothing more than a monster in an expensive suit. The only question was how much longer he could keep up the performance before it finally killed him. Olivia adjusted the black cocktail dress for the 3rd time, staring at her reflection in the employee bathroom at Romano's. The dress belonged to her coworker Maria, who was roughly the same size and had a much more interesting social life. It fit well enough, though Olivia felt like she was wearing a costume for a play she'd never auditioned for. "You clean up nice," Maria said, applying lipstick in the mirror beside her. This mystery date must be something special. If only she knew. Olivia had spent the past week crafting her cover story with the precision of a novelist. Sarah Chen, event coordinator for the Meridian Group, a real company that handled charity galas and corporate functions. She'd studied their website until she could recite their mission statement, learned the names of their major clients, even created a LinkedIn profile with just enough detail to seem legitimate. The hospital charity gala was the perfect hunting ground. High society, flowing alcohol, and Gregory Campbell would be there as one of the major donors. According to the society pages, he never missed an opportunity to be seen supporting local causes, especially when those causes provided tax benefits and positive publicity. "Remember," Maria continued, "confidence is everything. Rich guys can smell desperation from across the room." Olivia nodded, though desperation was exactly what she was trying to hide. She'd practiced her backstory in the mirror for hours, perfecting the blend of professional competence and subtle vulnerability that men like Gregory Campbell seemed to find irresistible. Not too aggressive, not too meek, just innocent enough to trigger their protective instincts. The Riverside Grand Hotel ballroom was a monument to tasteful excess. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over cream-colored walls adorned with oil paintings that probably cost more than Olivia's house. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each centerpiece a small fortune in orchids and roses. Olivia arrived fashionably late, clutching a leather portfolio that contained legitimate event planning materials she'd borrowed from the Meridian Group's website. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the registration table. "Sarah Chen, Meridian Group," she said to the volunteer, a silver-haired woman whose jewelry could have funded a small country's GDP. "Of course, dear. Your table number is right here." The woman handed over a name tag and table assignment. "Such a wonderful cause. My husband's company donated the floral arrangements." Olivia smiled and nodded, making appropriate sounds of appreciation while scanning the room for her target. Gregory Campbell stood near the bar, exactly as she'd expected. Tall, commanding, surrounded by a small circle of admirers hanging on his every word. He wore his wealth like armor, from his perfectly tailored tuxedo to the Rolex that caught the light when he gestured. She observed him for 20 minutes, noting his patterns. He dominated conversations without appearing to do so, asking just enough questions to seem interested while steering topics toward his own achievements. When someone mentioned the new development project, his chest swelled with pride when the conversation turned to city council politics. His smile grew sharp-edged. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Chen?" Olivia turned to find a woman in her 40s approaching, blonde, elegant, with the kind of understated makeup that cost a fortune to achieve. "Yes, that's me. I'm Jennifer Morrison, on the hospital board. I wanted to thank you for all your work on tonight's event. Everything looks absolutely beautiful." Panic flashed through Olivia's mind. She hadn't worked on this event. She was crashing it, but she forced her expression to remain calm. "Thank you so much. The hospital staff has been wonderful to work with. I was just telling Gregory Campbell about the new Children's Wing fundraiser we're planning for next year. He mentioned wanting to discuss corporate sponsorship opportunities." This was it, the opening she'd been waiting for. "Mr. Campbell has such a reputation for community involvement," Olivia said. "I'd love to meet him." Jennifer led her across the room like a guided missile, weaving between tables with practiced ease. Gregory was in the middle of a story about a city council meeting when they approached. "Gregory, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen from the Meridian Group. She's the brilliant coordinator behind tonight's success." Gregory turned, and Olivia felt the full force of his attention. His eyes were pale blue, calculating, the kind that missed nothing. When he smiled, it was perfunctory, until he really looked at her. "Ms. Chen," he extended a hand, and his grip lingered just a beat too long. "I'm impressed. This is exactly the kind of event that reflects well on our community." "Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Your reputation for supporting local causes is well known. Please call me Gregory." His smile warmed considerably. "And what brings someone with your obvious talents to our little corner of the world?" Olivia had rehearsed this moment dozens of times. "I grew up about an hour from here, but I've been working in Chicago for the past few years. There's something appealing about coming home, you know, making a difference in a place that actually feels like home." It was the perfect blend of truth and fiction. She had grown up nearby, just not in the privileged circumstances her dress and demeanor suggested, but Gregory's expression shifted, becoming more attentive. "I understand completely. There's nothing like small-town values, especially for someone in business. Big cities can be so impersonal." "Exactly." Olivia allowed herself a small smile. "Though I have to admit, I'm still learning the local landscape, who the real community leaders are, which families have been making a difference for generations." Gregory's chest puffed slightly. "Well, the Campbell family has been part of this community for over 30 years. We believe in investing where we live. That's wonderful. It must be gratifying to build something lasting, something your children can be proud of. For just a moment, Gregory's expression flickered. Something dark passed across his features, before the polished smile returned. It is indeed, though the next generation sometimes needs guidance to appreciate what they've inherited. There was an edge to his voice that made Olivia's investigative instincts perk up. This was personal territory, and personal meant vulnerable. I can imagine. It must be challenging to raise children who understand both privilege and responsibility. You're very perceptive, Miss Chen. Gregory stepped closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. My son Tyler is struggling with that balance. Brilliant young man, but he's been going through a difficult period. Olivia forced her expression to remain sympathetic while her pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of information she'd been hoping for. I'm sure he'll find his way. Sometimes the most successful people take the longest to discover their true calling. That's very generous of you to say. Gregory's eyes softened slightly. Most people his age are so judgmental, so quick to write someone off for past mistakes. Past mistakes. The phrase hung in the air like incense. We all make mistakes, Olivia said gently. What matters is learning from them and finding a way to make amends. Gregory studied her for a long moment, and Olivia could practically see the wheels turning in his head. She was young enough to be non-threatening, sophisticated enough to understand his world, and sympathetic enough to see past his son's obvious problems. You know, Sarah, I'd like to continue this conversation, perhaps over dinner sometime this week. I'd like that very much. They exchanged business cards, hers meticulously crafted. His embossed with gold lettering that probably cost more than her monthly salary. As Gregory excused himself to mingle with other donors, Olivia felt a mixture of triumph and nausea. She'd done it. She'd gotten Gregory Campbell's attention, positioned herself as someone he wanted to know better. The foundation of her plan was in place. But watching him work the room, charming donors, commanding respect, playing the role of benevolent community leader, she was struck by how thoroughly he'd constructed his public image. This was a man who understood power, who'd spent decades perfecting the art of manipulation. She thought about Tyler. Somewhere in this room, the son who was struggling with balance, the son who'd killed her father and walked away clean because his last name was Campbell. As the evening wound down, Olivia made her gracious goodbyes, promising to follow up about the dinner plans. In her car, she sat for a moment in the hotel parking lot, processing what had just happened. Phase 1 was complete. She'd infiltrated Gregory Campbell's social circle, established herself as someone worth his interest. Now came the delicate work of building trust, of becoming someone he'd confide in, someone he might trust with his son's secrets. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Your mother's condition has stabilized. Next consultation scheduled for Friday. $50,000. A dying mother. A killer walking free. The game had begun in earnest. The restaurant Gregory had chosen for their dinner was the kind of place that didn't list prices on the menu, where the sommelier spoke in reverent whispers about vintage years and terroir. Olivia had arrived 15 minutes early, using the time to study her surroundings and calm her nerves. Crystal glasses, real silver cutlery, waiters who glided between tables like ghosts in expensive suits. She'd spent her last $100 on a new dress, navy blue, conservative but elegant. The kind of outfit that whispered trustworthy professional rather than screaming desperate waitress. The investment hurt, but Gregory Campbell was a man who noticed details, and those details would shape his opinion of her worth. Sarah, his voice carried across the restaurant as he approached her table. Even here, among his social equals, Gregory commanded attention. Other diners looked up as he passed, offering nods of recognition and respect. Gregory, thank you for inviting me. She stood to greet him, accepting the brief kiss on her cheek that seemed to be standard protocol in his circle. The pleasure is mine. I've been looking forward to this all week. The dinner conversation flowed like expensive wine, smooth, intoxicating, and deceptively powerful. Gregory was a masterful storyteller, weaving tales of business triumphs and community involvement that painted him as both a shrewd businessman and a benevolent patriarch. Olivia played her part perfectly, asking the right questions, laughing at his subtle jokes, projecting the image of an intelligent woman who appreciated successful men. You mentioned at the gala that you're new to the area. Gregory said over the main course. Sea bass that probably cost more than Olivia made in a week. What made you decide to leave Chicago? This was the moment she'd prepared for, the foundation of her cover story. Honestly, I was getting tired of the corporate rat race. Big city, big agency, everything focused on billable hours and profit margins. She took a sip of wine, a bottle that Gregory had selected without looking at the price. I lost sight of why I got into event planning in the first place. I wanted to create experiences that actually mattered to people. That's admirable. Too many young people today are only interested in what they can get, not what they can give back. Exactly. My father always said that success isn't just about what you accomplish, but about how you lift up the people around you. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, but Gregory's expression softened with approval. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Cancer took him 2 years ago. The lie came easier than she'd expected, wrapped in just enough truth to sound authentic. That's part of why I wanted to come back. Life's too short to spend it in places that don't feel like home. Gregory reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his. I'm sorry for your loss. Losing a parent changes everything. For a moment, his mask slipped, and Olivia glimpsed something raw in his expression. Pain, regret, maybe even guilt. Then the polished facade snapped back into place. It does, she agreed, but it also clarifies what's important. Family, community, making sure the people you love know how much they mean to you. That's something I struggle with sometimes, Gregory admitted, swirling his wine thoughtfully. Being a father, especially to a son who seems determined to waste every opportunity you've given him. There it was, the opening she'd been waiting for. Tyler, she asked gently, you mentioned at the gala that he's going through a difficult time. Gregory's jaw tightened. That's one way to put it. The boy has everything handed to him. Money, education, a position in the family business, and he's throwing it all away on alcohol and self-pity. Sometimes the most privileged children struggle the most with finding their purpose, Olivia offered. When everything comes easy, it can be hard to understand your own worth. You're very generous. Most people his age would call him a spoiled brat. I'm not most people. She met his eyes directly. And I've learned that there's usually more to the story than what appears on the surface. Gregory studied her for a long moment, and Olivia could see him making calculations behind those pale blue eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more intimate. Tyler had an accident a few years ago. Nothing serious, but it shook him up badly. Ever since then, he's been different, withdrawn, self-destructive. I've tried everything. Therapy. Tough love. Even cutting off his allowance for a while. Nothing seems to reach him. An accident? Olivia's fingers tightened around her wine glass, but she kept her expression neutral. That must be heartbreaking for you, watching someone you love hurt themselves and not being able to help. It is. Gregory's admission seemed to surprise him. I built everything I have with the intention of passing it on to him someday. But how can I trust him with a legacy when he can't even trust himself? The vulnerability in his voice was genuine, and for a split second, Olivia almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then she remembered her father's funeral, her mother's hospital bills, and the steel returned to her spine. Maybe he needs something to focus on besides his own problems, she suggested. Sometimes helping others can help us heal ourselves. That's very wise. Gregory signaled for the check, though they'd barely touched dessert. Sarah, I have to ask, are you seeing anyone? Romantically, I mean. The question caught her off guard. No, I'm not. Why do you ask? Because I have a proposition for you. A business proposition, he added quickly, though his smile suggested otherwise. What would you say to earning a significant bonus for a very simple event coordination job? I'd say that depends on the job. Gregory leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. I want you to spend an evening with Tyler. Take him to dinner, maybe dancing. Show him what it's like to be around a quality woman for once, instead of the gold diggers and party girls he usually associates with. Olivia's heart stopped. I'm not sure I understand. Nothing inappropriate, Gregory said quickly, though his eyes suggested he wouldn't be opposed to inappropriate. Just an evening of intelligent conversation with someone who might help him remember that there are good people in the world, someone who might inspire him to be better than he's been. And the compensation for this? Inspiration. Gregory reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. $50,000. The number hit Olivia like a physical blow. $50,000. Exactly the amount her mother needed for treatment. It couldn't be a coincidence. That's extremely generous for a dinner date, she managed. Tyler is worth far more than that to me. And honestly, Sarah, you're exactly what he needs right now. Someone pure, someone who hasn't been corrupted by money or cynicism. Gregory's hand covered hers again. Someone who might remind him that redemption is possible. Olivia stared at the envelope, her mind racing. This was it, the opportunity she'd been working toward, but not at all the way she'd imagined it. Gregory wasn't just offering her access to Tyler, he was literally paying her to seduce his son. The irony was almost unbearable. Gregory Campbell, the man who'd covered up his son's crime, was now offering her exactly what she needed to save her mother's life, in exchange for spending one night with the man who'd killed her father. "I need to think about this," she said. "Of course, take your time." Gregory slid the envelope across the table. "Consider it a down payment on your decision." Olivia picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. $50,000. Her mother's life. Her father's killer. "There's just one thing I need to know," she said carefully. "Why Tyler? Why not ask me to dinner yourself?" Gregory's smile turned predatory. "Because Tyler needs saving, and I think you might be exactly the angel he's been waiting for. As for me," he lifted his wine glass in a mock toast, "I prefer my relationships to be entirely voluntary." The drive home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Olivia pulled into her driveway and sat in the darkness, staring at the envelope in her lap. Inside was more money than she'd ever seen in one place. Enough to save her mother. Enough to change everything. All she had to do was spend one evening with the man who destroyed her family. She thought about Tyler Campbell, the broken heir struggling with guilt and addiction. She thought about her mother, lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. She thought about her father, who'd taught her that every person deserved compassion, even those who'd lost their way. But mostly, she thought about justice, and how sometimes it came wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Gregory Campbell had just offered her $1 million opportunity for revenge. The only question was whether she was strong enough to take it. The Grand Meridian Hotel felt different at night. The lobby's crystal chandeliers cast longer shadows, and the marble floors echoed with each footstep like accusations. Olivia stood at the elevator bank, room keycard trembling in her hand, watching the numbers climb toward the 15th floor, room 1547. The suite Gregory had booked for tonight's dinner date with Tyler. She'd spent 3 days preparing for this moment. 3 days that felt like 3 years. The plan was simple. Drug Tyler's drink with the sleeping pills she'd crushed into powder, then stage compromising photos that would destroy his reputation and, by extension, his father's political influence. Blackmail material that would force Gregory to confess to covering up the hit and run, or at least provide enough leverage to reopen the case. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that sounded like a death knell. Tyler was already in the suite when she arrived. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, he wore a dark suit that probably cost more than her car, but it hung loose on his frame, and his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to disappear into himself. "You must be Sarah," he said without turning around. His voice was rougher than she'd expected, worn down by years of whiskey and regret. "And you're Tyler. Thank you for agreeing to this." He finally faced her, and Olivia was struck by how different he looked from the society page photos she'd studied. Those images showed a confident young man with his father's sharp features and commanding presence. The man before her was a ghost of that person, hollow-eyed, pale, with the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. "Don't thank me yet. You might change your mind once you get to know me." Tyler moved to the suite's bar and poured himself 3 fingers of vodka. "Can I get you something, wine? Champagne? Something strong enough to make this whole charade bearable?" "Wine would be nice." Olivia watched him carefully, noting the slight tremor in his hands, the way he downed the vodka like medicine. This wasn't the privileged party boy she'd imagined. This was a man slowly drowning in his own guilt. Tyler poured her a glass of wine with the careful precision of someone who'd practiced the motion countless times while drunk. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt him flinch at the contact. "So?" he said, settling into an armchair across from her. My father hired you to fix me. What's your strategy? Tough love? Gentle encouragement? Or are you going to skip straight to telling me what a disappointment I am to the family name?" The bitterness in his voice was like acid. Olivia had expected arrogance, entitlement, maybe even aggression. She hadn't expected this raw, self-aware pain. "Actually, your father thought I might be good company for the evening. Someone to talk to who doesn't have an agenda." Tyler laughed. But there was no humor in it. Everyone has an agenda when it comes to the Campbell family. The question is whether you're after money, connections, or just the thrill of being close to power. What if I told you I don't care about any of those things? I'd say you're either lying or naive. Tyler took another drink, larger this time. "Trust me, everyone wants something. The trick is figuring out what it is before they figure out how to get it." Olivia watched him pour his third drink in 10 minutes. Her plan shifting in real time. The sleeping pills were in her purse, ready to be deployed. But something about Tyler's obvious self-destruction made her hesitate. This wasn't the predator she'd been expecting. "You seem like you're in pain," she said carefully. "Perceptive." Tyler raised his glass in a mock toast. "Here's to pain, the one constant in the Campbell family legacy. Do you want to talk about it?" "God, no. Talking about it makes it real, and I spend most of my energy pretending it's not." Tyler's laugh was hollow. "Besides, what would someone like you understand about real guilt? You probably never did anything worse than return a library book late." The comment stung because it was so close to her carefully constructed image. Pure, innocent Sarah Chen. The kind of woman who inspired men to be better versions of themselves. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said. "Mistakes." Tyler rolled the word around his mouth like it tasted bitter. "Is that what we're calling it? That's generous of you." The alcohol was hitting him harder now. His words were starting to slur slightly, and his eyes had taken on that glassy quality she recognized from her nights serving drinks at Romano's. But there was something else there too. A desperate need to confess, to unburden himself to someone who might not judge him. "Tyler, what happened? What's eating at you so badly?" For a moment, she thought he might actually tell her. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The words seemed to be fighting their way up from some deep, dark place inside him. "I killed someone," he whispered. Olivia's wine glass nearly slipped from her fingers. She'd been expecting this confession for weeks, planning for it, but hearing the actual words felt like being punched in the stomach. "What?" 3 years ago, October 15th. Tyler's voice was barely audible now. "It was raining, and I was drunk, and I was driving too fast because I'd just had another fight with my father about what a failure I was. And there was this man." Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. October 15th, the night her father died. "He was just walking," Tyler continued, tears beginning to stream down his face. "Just walking home from wherever he'd been, and I came around that corner and I didn't see him until it was too late. The sound when I hit him. God, the sound. She should say something. Comfort him or condemn him or reveal who she really was. But Olivia found herself frozen, watching this broken man confess to murdering her father with tears in his eyes. I stopped the car. I got out and I saw him lying there. And there was blood. So much blood." Tyler was sobbing now, the alcohol stripping away years of carefully constructed defenses. "I called my father, and he came with the lawyer, and they made it all go away. They covered it up, paid people off, destroyed evidence, made me into a killer who got away with murder." "Tyler, do you know what the worst part is?" He looked up at her with eyes that were drowning in anguish. "It's not the guilt, though that's killing me. It's not even knowing that somewhere there's a family that lost someone they loved because of me. The worst part is that I let my father turn me into him, into someone who believes that money can fix anything, even taking a life." Olivia stared at him, her mind reeling. This wasn't the arrogant killer she'd imagined for 3 years. This was a man who'd been carrying her father's death like a stone in his chest, drinking himself to death because he couldn't live with what he'd done. "Why are you telling me this?" she managed. Tyler wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing tears across his cheek. "Because you asked, and because..." He looked at her with something that might have been hope. "Because you're the first person in 3 years who looked at me like I might be worth saving." The sleeping pills felt heavy in Olivia's purse. Her plan had been so simple. So clean, drug him, take the photos, destroy his life the way he'd destroyed hers. But looking at Tyler now, broken, guilty, slowly killing himself with remorse, she realized that her revenge had already been accomplished. Tyler Campbell was already being destroyed by what he'd done to her father. The question was whether she wanted to help him die faster or find some other kind of justice. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. Tyler looked up at her expectantly, and Olivia felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a physical force. In her purse was the photo of her father that she carried everywhere. One look at it, and Tyler would know exactly who she was and why she was really here. She reached for her purse, her fingers closing around the familiar leather of her wallet. Justice, revenge, redemption. The choice was hers to make. Olivia's fingers trembled as she pulled out her wallet, the worn leather familiar against her palm. Inside, tucked behind her driver's license, was the photo she'd carried for 3 years. Her father at last year's community center barbecue, smiling broadly with his arm around Mrs. Martinez from the ESL class. It was the last picture taken of Robert Brooks before that rainy October night changed everything. Tyler was still crying, his face buried in his hands, alcohol and grief stripping away every defense he'd built over the past 3 years. The confession hung in the air between them like smoke, thick and suffocating. "Tyler," she said softly, "look at me." He raised his head, eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. For a moment, he just stared at her, confusion flickering across his features. Then his gaze dropped to the photograph in her hands. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. Tyler's face went completely white. The wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hotel room's marble floor in an explosion of crystal and burgundy liquid. He lurched backward in his chair, nearly toppling over, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." "Robert Brooks," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "My father." Tyler shot to his feet so fast he knocked over the side table, sending the vodka bottle crashing to the floor. He stumbled backward toward the window, shaking his head violently. "This isn't real. This can't be real. You can't be Olivia Brooks. I'm 22 years old. I worked 2 jobs to pay for my mother's cancer treatment. And 3 years ago, you killed my father and drove away." The words hit Tyler like individual bullets. He pressed his back against the window, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, knees drawn up to his chest. The sound coming from his throat wasn't quite crying. It was deeper than that, more primal, the sound of a soul breaking apart. "God help me," he gasped. "God help me, I'm so sorry, I'm so fucking sorry." Olivia stood frozen in the center of the room, watching the man who'd destroyed her family fall apart completely. This wasn't how she'd imagined this moment. In her fantasies, Tyler had been defiant, making excuses, trying to justify the unjustifiable. She'd never pictured him collapsing like a marionette with cut strings. "I dream about him every night," Tyler was saying, rocking back and forth. "Every single night for 3 years, he looks at me with these eyes, these kind eyes, and I try to tell him I'm sorry, but I can't speak, and he just nods, like he forgives me, but I know I don't deserve it." "You don't," Olivia said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. I know I don't." Tyler looked up at her, and the pain in his expression was so raw it made her flinch. "I've been trying to die ever since that night. Pills, alcohol, hoping I'd crash my car or just not wake up one morning, but I keep living, and every day I live is another day he's dead because of me." The hotel room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Olivia moved to the window, needing space to think, to breathe. Below them, the city sparkled with lights, people going about their lives, unaware that a killer and his victim's daughter were having their final confrontation 15 floors above. "Why didn't you stop?" she asked. "Why didn't you get out and help him?" Tyler's laugh was bitter, broken. "Because I'm a coward. Because the first thing I thought wasn't, 'Oh God, I've hurt someone.' It was, 'Oh God, my father's going to kill me.' I was 25 years old and my first instinct was to run home to Daddy and let him fix it. So you called Gregory. I called my father, and he came with Marcus Webb, our lawyer, and they took care of everything. made the car disappear, bought off the right people, created an alibi. Tyler wiped his nose with his sleeve, a gesture so childlike it was heartbreaking. They turned me into a murderer who got away with it. You were already a murderer the moment you hit him and drove away. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Tyler nodded slowly, accepting the verdict. You're right. Everything after that was just covering up what I already was. He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly from the alcohol. What happens now? Do you call the police? Are you recording this? Olivia hadn't thought that far ahead. For 3 years, this moment had been her endgame. Confronting her father's killer, forcing him to face what he'd done. But now that it was happening, she felt empty, hollow. The rage that had sustained her for so long was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, something that might have been pity. I should call the police, she said. You should. You absolutely should. Tyler moved toward the hotel phone. I'll call them myself. I should have done it 3 years ago. Tyler, wait. He stopped, his hand hovering over the receiver. Wait for what? I killed your father, I confessed. End of story. It's not that simple. It is that simple. I'm a killer. You're his daughter. Justice is justice. But even as he said it, Tyler made no move toward the phone. Instead, he sank into the nearest chair, looking older than his 28 years. You want to know the really sick part, he said. When my father told me he'd made it all go away, part of me was relieved. Not just because I wouldn't go to prison, but because I thought maybe I could pretend it never happened. Maybe I could go back to being the person I was before that night. But you couldn't. No, because your father's face is burned into my memory. Because every time I close my eyes, I see him in my headlights. Because I know that somewhere his family was grieving while I was attending charity galas and pretending to be a human being. Tyler looked at her with something that might have been curiosity. How did you find me? How did you know? Olivia told him about the investigation she'd conducted, the pieces she'd put together, the months of planning that had led to tonight. With each detail, Tyler's expression grew more amazed. You did all that by yourself, Jesus. Your father raised an incredible daughter. The compliment hit her like a slap. She didn't want his admiration, didn't want him to see her as anything other than the instrument of his destruction. Don't you dare, she said. Don't you dare talk about my father like you knew him. You're right. I'm sorry. Tyler stood up again, steadier this time. But for what it's worth, if he was anything like you, he must have been an amazing man. He was. What was he like? The question caught her off guard. What? Your father. What was he like? I've been carrying his death for 3 years, but I don't know anything about his life. Olivia stared at Tyler, trying to process the request. Part of her wanted to refuse, to deny him even that small connection to the man he'd killed. But another part, the part that sounded like her father's voice, whispered that even killers deserved to understand the weight of what they'd taken. He taught English to immigrants at the community center, she said finally. He believed that everyone deserved a chance to build a better life in America. No matter where they came from or what language they spoke, he was walking home from there the night you killed him. Tyler's face crumpled. He was helping people. Of course he was helping people. He was the kindest man I've ever known. He never raised his voice, never said an unkind word about anyone. When my mother got sick, he worked 3 jobs to pay for her treatment and never complained once. Stop, Tyler whispered. Please stop. He used to make pancakes every Sunday morning, and he'd let me help even though I always made a mess. He taught me to drive in the parking lot behind the church. He walked me to school every day until I was 12 and begged him to stop because the other kids thought it was embarrassing. Tyler was sobbing again, great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. He was everything good in the world, Olivia continued, her own tears coming now. And you took him away from us for no reason. For nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the city continued its nightly rhythm. But inside the hotel room, time seemed suspended. 2 people bound together by tragedy, killer and victim's daughter, facing the truth that had taken 3 years to surface. Finally, Tyler spoke. I'm going to turn myself in. What? Tonight? Right now? I'm going to call the police and confess everything. Tyler's voice was stronger now, more certain than it had been all evening. It won't bring your father back. and it won't undo what I did, but it's the only thing I can do that might mean anything." Olivia stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't how she'd planned it. In her fantasies, she'd been the one to destroy Tyler Campbell, to drag him down and watch him burn. But he was doing it himself, choosing his own destruction. "My father will try to stop you," she said. "Let him try. I'm done being his puppet." Tyler moved toward the phone again. "I'm done letting his money protect me from what I deserve." As he reached for the receiver, Olivia felt something shift inside her chest. For 3 years, she'd wanted justice for her father's death. Now, watching Tyler prepare to sacrifice everything for a chance at redemption, she realized that justice might look different than she'd imagined. Tyler's hand was trembling as he reached for the phone, but before he could dial, the hotel room door burst open with a violence that shattered the moment. Gregory Campbell stood in the doorway, his face a mask of controlled fury, flanked by Marcus Webb and another man Olivia didn't recognize. Tall, dark suit, the kind of neutral expression that screamed private security. "Step away from the phone, Tyler." Tyler froze, his hand still hovering over the receiver. "Dad, how did you—" "I've had someone watching Ms. Brooks for the past week." Gregory's cold gaze shifted to Olivia. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate someone who suddenly appeared in my life with such convenient timing?" The man in the dark suit stepped forward, pulling out a small device. "The room's been bugged since this afternoon, Mr. Campbell. We heard everything." Olivia's blood turned to ice. They'd heard Tyler's confession, her real identity, everything. The trap she'd spent months building had just snapped shut around both of them. "You clever little bitch," Gregory said, his voice soft and deadly. "Olivia Brooks, 22 years old, works at Murphy's Diner and Romano's restaurant. Mother Susan Brooks, currently receiving chemotherapy at Mercy General. You've been very thorough in your investigation, haven't you?" "Dad, leave her alone." Tyler stepped between them, swaying slightly from the alcohol but resolute. "This is my fault, not hers." "Your fault," Gregory laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tyler, you're too drunk and too stupid to orchestrate something like this. This little whore has been playing us both from the beginning." The word hit Olivia like a physical blow, but she forced herself to stand straighter. "I'm not the criminal here. Aren't you? Identity theft, fraud, prostitution. Because let's call tonight what it really was. You took $50,000 to sleep with my son. I didn't sleep with him. No, you did something much worse. You manipulated a mentally unstable alcoholic into confessing to a crime that was already resolved 3 years ago." Tyler's face went white. "Resolved, Dad. I killed an innocent man. I've been living with that guilt. You've been living with imagined guilt because you're weak," Gregory snapped. "The accident was investigated thoroughly. The case was closed due to lack of evidence, end of story." "Accident," Olivia found her voice, amazement and rage warring in her chest. "He just confessed to killing my father and driving away. How is that an accident?" Gregory turned his full attention to her, and she felt the weight of his power like a physical presence. This was a man who'd spent decades crushing people who stood in his way. "Your father was walking in the street during a rainstorm. Ms. Brooks, visibility was poor, and unfortunately, accidents happen. If my son had been involved, which I'm not admitting, it would have been a tragic accident, not murder." "He was drunk," Olivia shot back. "He just told us he was drunk. He tells people a lot of things when he's been drinking. Tyler has a vivid imagination and a guilty conscience about everything. Last month, he confessed to causing global warming." Tyler stared at his father in horror. "Dad, you know what really happened. You covered it up. You paid people off, destroyed evidence." "I protected my family from a false accusation," Gregory said calmly, "just like I'm going to protect us now." The man in the dark suit stepped forward again. "Sir, what do you want us to do about the girl?" Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs, the casual way he asked the question, like her life was just another business decision to be made, chilled her to the bone. "Nothing dramatic," Gregory said. "Ms. Brooks is going to accept a very generous settlement for her, consulting services, and then she's going to disappear, permanently." "Dad, no." Tyler moved closer to Olivia, his drunken swagger replaced by desperate clarity. "You can't threaten her. She hasn't done anything wrong. She's attempting to extort our family based on the delusional ramblings of an alcoholic. That's a federal crime. "It's not delusional if it's true," Tyler said, his voice growing stronger. "I killed Robert Brooks. I was driving drunk. I hit him and I drove away. You covered it up and I let you. We're both guilty." Gregory's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "Tyler, you're going to shut your mouth right now, or I'm going to have you committed for psychiatric evaluation. Again." Again, the word hung in the air like a threat. Olivia looked at Tyler and saw the fear flicker across his face. The fear of a man who'd been institutionalized before, who knew his father had the power to make him disappear into the medical system. "You wouldn't," Tyler whispered. "I would, I have, and I'll do it again to protect this family's reputation." Gregory straightened his tie, composing himself. "Now, Mrs. Brooks, let's discuss your settlement. $500,000 in exchange for your complete silence about tonight's conversation, and any wild theories you might have about my son's involvement in your father's death. $500,000. Enough to save her mother 10 times over. Enough to disappear. Start a new life somewhere far from the Campbell family's influence. But taking the money would mean letting her father's killer walk free. Would mean accepting that justice was for sale to the highest bidder. "What if I refuse?" she asked. Gregory smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression she'd ever seen. "Then you'll discover that young women who make false accusations against prominent families sometimes have terrible accidents, car crashes, home invasions, drug overdoses. This city can be very dangerous for someone without protection." The threat was delivered with the same casual tone he might use to discuss the weather. Olivia understood now how Tyler had become so broken. Growing up with a father who treated human lives like chess pieces would destroy anyone's soul. "You're threatening to kill me," she said. "I'm explaining the consequences of making poor choices," Gregory corrected. "The choice is entirely yours." Tyler suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the hotel phone. "I'm calling the police. Right now. I'm confessing to everything." The man in the dark suit moved faster than Olivia would have thought possible, yanking Tyler away from the phone and slamming him against the wall. Tyler tried to fight back, but the alcohol and years of self-destruction had left him weak. The security man pressed a knee into Tyler's back, pinning him. "Let him go," Olivia said. $500,000, Gregory repeated, "plus a full scholarship to any university you choose, and a job waiting for you when you graduate. All you have to do is walk away." Olivia stared at Tyler, who was struggling weakly against his captor. For 3 years, she dreamed of this moment, of having her father's killer at her mercy. But this wasn't mercy. This was Gregory Campbell buying his son's freedom, the same way he'd bought everything else in his life. "If I take the money," she said slowly, "Tyler goes free. Tyler gets the help he needs, private treatment, the best doctor's money can buy. He'll get clean, get healthy, and maybe even learn to forgive himself for something that was never his fault to begin with. And my father stays dead and forgotten. Your father was a good man who died in a tragic accident. Taking my money won't bring him back, but it will ensure your mother gets the treatment she needs, and you get the future you deserve." The envelope of cash was still in her purse. The $50,000 Gregory had given her for tonight. Adding the settlement would make it more money than she'd ever imagined having. Her mother could live. She could go to college, build a career, escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped her family for generations. All she had to do was let her father's killer buy his way out of justice. Tyler managed to turn his head toward her, his face pressed against the wall. "Don't do it," he gasped. "Don't let him win. Your father deserves better." "Tyler's right," she said quietly. "My father does deserve better." Gregory's smile widened. "I'm glad we understand each other." "No," Olivia continued. "You don't understand me at all." She pulled out her phone and hit the emergency call button before anyone could stop her. 911, what's your emergency? "I'd like to report a murder," Olivia said clearly. "And I have the killer's confession." The room exploded into chaos. Gregory lunged for her phone while the security man released Tyler to grab Olivia. But Tyler, freed from restraint, threw himself at his father with surprising force. And both men crashed into the hotel room's coffee table. "This is 911, the operator was saying. "Can you repeat your emergency?" Olivia clutched the phone like a lifeline as Gregory's man grabbed her arm. Robert Brooks was murdered 3 years ago in a hit and run. The killer just confessed, and his father has been covering it up. We're at the Grand Meridian Hotel, room 1547. Ma'am, please stay on the line. We're dispatching units to your location. Gregory struggled to his feet, his perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit torn. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely afraid. You have no idea what you've just done, he said. Yes, I do, Olivia replied. I chose justice over money, something you've never understood. In the distance, she could hear sirens approaching. 6 months later, Olivia stood outside the courthouse steps, watching the media circus that had consumed her life since that night at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Reporters jostled for position. Cameras clicked incessantly. And somewhere in the chaos, a prosecutor was giving a statement about justice finally being served. The trial of Tyler Campbell had lasted 3 weeks and dominated local headlines. Every sordid detail had been dissected. The cover-up, the bribes, the 3 years of lies that had protected a killer while a family grieved. Gregory Campbell's empire had crumbled under the weight of federal investigations that uncovered decades of corruption, tax evasion, and political manipulation. But today wasn't about Gregory's downfall. Today was about Tyler's sentencing. And Olivia found herself in the surreal position of preparing to address the court on behalf of the man who'd killed her father. You ready for this? Jake Morrison appeared beside her, offering a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been brewing since dawn. He'd been her anchor through the media storm. The one person who'd stood by her without asking for anything in return. I don't think anyone's ever ready for something like this, she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Over the past 6 months, Jake had become more than just the sweet construction worker from Murphy's diner. He'd driven her to court hearings, held her when the nightmares came, and somehow managed to love her despite the darkness that had consumed her life. They weren't officially together. Olivia was still too raw, too broken to trust her own emotions. But he was there, steady and patient, waiting for her to heal. The prosecutor thinks Tyler will get 8 to 10 years, Jake said. Could be worse. It could be much worse. Tyler had confessed to vehicular manslaughter, leaving the scene of an accident, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. His cooperation with federal investigators had earned him some leniency, but he was still looking at significant prison time. Ms. Brooks, a young woman with a press badge, approached tentatively. Jennifer Walsh, Channel 7 News. Could we get a quick statement about today's sentencing? Olivia had learned to hate reporters over the past months. They'd turned her father's death into entertainment, her family's tragedy into a ratings grab. But she'd also learned that they could be useful when she needed to get a message out. Justice isn't just about punishment, she said, looking directly into the camera. It's about truth, accountability, and the courage to make things right. Today, we're seeing all of those things. Inside the courthouse, the gallery was packed. Olivia had reserved seats in the front row, one for herself, one for her mother, and one empty chair for her father's memory. Susan Brooks sat beside her daughter, thinner than before but alive. Her cancer in remission thanks to the treatment fund that had grown from Gregory's seized assets. Tyler sat at the defendant's table, looking older than his 28 years. Prison orange didn't suit him, but something else had changed too. The hollow desperation that had defined him for years was gone, replaced by a kind of resigned peace. He'd finally stopped running from what he'd done. When their eyes met across the courtroom, Tyler nodded slightly. It wasn't forgiveness. They'd never gotten that far, but it was acknowledgement. Two people bound together by tragedy, trying to find meaning in the wreckage. Judge Patricia Harrison called the court to order, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. She'd presided over the entire case with fairness and dignity, refusing to be swayed by the media circus or political pressure. Before I pronounce sentence, Judge Harrison said, I'll hear victim impact statements. Miss Brooks, you may proceed. Olivia stood on trembling legs, walking to the podium that felt like a mountain peak. The courtroom fell silent, everyone waiting to hear what the victim's daughter would say about the man who'd killed her father. She looked out at the sea of faces, reporters, court officials, curious spectators who'd followed the case like a soap opera. Then she found Tyler's eyes and spoke directly to him. 3 years ago, you took my father away from us. Robert Brooks was 52 years old, had been married to my mother for 25 years, and had never hurt anyone in his life. When you hit him with your car and drove away, you didn't just kill him. You shattered our entire world. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. But he didn't look away. For 3 years, my mother and I lived with the pain of not knowing what happened. We couldn't grieve properly because we didn't have answers. We couldn't find peace because we didn't have justice. Your father's money and influence turned our tragedy into a cold case file that collected dust while you went on living your life. Olivia paused, gathering strength for what came next. But I also learned something during this trial. I learned that you've been dying inside since that night. I learned that guilt and remorse have been eating you alive, that you've been trying to destroy yourself because you couldn't live with what you'd done. And I realized that in some ways, you've been serving a sentence for 3 years already. The courtroom stirred with murmurs of surprise. This wasn't the vengeful victim impact statement everyone had expected. That doesn't excuse what you did, Olivia continued. Nothing can excuse killing an innocent man and driving away, but it means something that you finally found the courage to tell the truth, even when it meant losing everything. She pulled out a piece of paper, her hands shaking slightly. Your Honor, I've written a letter to the court, not asking for leniency, but asking for something else. I'm asking that Tyler Campbell's sentence include mandatory alcohol treatment, community service with victims' families, and participation in a program that educates young people about the consequences of drunk driving. The murmurs grew louder. Even the prosecutor looked surprised. I don't want Tyler Campbell to just disappear into the prison system, Olivia said. I want his punishment to mean something. I want other families to be spared what mine went through. I want my father's death to save other lives. She turned back to Tyler, who was crying openly now. You can't bring my father back. You can't undo the pain you caused, but you can spend the rest of your life making sure it never happens again. You can honor his memory by becoming the kind of man he was, someone who helps people instead of hurting them. When Olivia returned to her seat, the courtroom was completely silent. Susan Brooks reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. Judge Harrison took a recess to consider the sentencing recommendations. When court reconvened an hour later, her expression was grave. Tyler Campbell, please stand. Tyler rose unsteadily, his lawyer beside him. You have pled guilty to vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated, leaving the scene of an accident, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. These are serious crimes that resulted in the death of an innocent man and caused immeasurable pain to his family. Tyler nodded, accepting the words like blows. However, the court also recognizes your cooperation with federal investigators, your genuine remorse, and the victim's family's extraordinary request for restorative rather than purely punitive justice. Judge Harrison paused, looking directly at Tyler. I hereby sentence you to 5 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 3 years contingent on successful completion of alcohol rehabilitation, anger management, and victim impact programs. Upon release, you will serve 3 years of supervised probation and perform 2,000 hours of community service with organizations supporting victims of drunk driving. Tyler's knees buckled slightly, but he remained standing. Additionally, the judge continued, you will participate in a victim impact speakers program, sharing your story with high school students and other at-risk populations. The court believes that your experience, painful as it is, can serve as a powerful deterrent to others who might make similar choices. Tyler nodded through his tears. Thank you, Your Honor. I won't waste this chance. As the bailiffs led Tyler away, he turned back toward Olivia. One last time, she saw something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Not peace exactly, but purpose. For the first time in 3 years, Tyler Campbell had a reason to live that wasn't centered on his own destruction. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, but Olivia had said everything she needed to say. Jake took her hand as they walked toward his truck, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she could breathe freely. You think you did the right thing? He asked as they drove away from the circus. Olivia looked back at the courthouse, where justice had finally been served. Not the perfect justice she'd once imagined, but something more complex and ultimately more meaningful. I think my father would be proud, she said. That was enough. 2 years later, Olivia Brooks Morrison stood at the entrance of the minimum security correctional facility, her wedding ring catching the morning sunlight. The name change still felt new, even 6 months after she and Jake had married in a small ceremony at the community center where her father had once volunteered. It seemed fitting to start their new life in the place where Robert Brooks had made his final contribution to the world. You sure about this? Jake asked, squeezing her hand gently. He'd offered to come with her, but this was something she needed to do alone. I'm sure. Olivia kissed his cheek, tasting the familiar salt of honest work. Jake had started his own construction company, specializing in affordable housing projects. Success suited him, but he remained the same steady, decent man who'd waited patiently for her heart to heal. I'll call when I'm done. The prison visit had been Tyler's idea. His letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, written in the careful handwriting of someone who'd had too much time to think about his words. He'd completed his alcohol rehabilitation program, finished his GED, and was 6 months away from parole. More importantly, he'd started something new, a program pairing inmates with victims' families for restorative justice dialogues. I understand if you never want to see me again, he'd written, but I've learned things here that I think might matter to you. About forgiveness, about healing, about the difference between justice and revenge. If you're willing, I'd like to share them with you. The visiting room was exactly what Olivia had expected. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, and the institutional smell of disinfectant and broken dreams. Tyler was already waiting at a corner table, wearing prison-issued khakis and a button-down shirt. The hollow desperation that had defined him was completely gone now, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. Olivia, he stood when she approached, uncertain whether to shake hands or maintain distance. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either. Until this morning. They sat across from each other, and Olivia was struck by how much Tyler had changed. He'd gained healthy weight, his eyes were clear, and there was a steadiness to his posture that spoke of hard-won sobriety. This was what recovery looked like on someone who'd finally stopped running from themselves. You look good, she said, and meant it. I feel good. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living instead of just existing. Tyler gestured around the visiting room. Strange as it sounds, this place saved my life. Being here, away from my father's influence, away from the money and the expectations. It gave me space to figure out who I actually am. And who is that? Tyler smiled, and it was the first genuine expression she'd ever seen from him. Someone who wants to spend the rest of his life making amends. Not just to you and your family, but to everyone who's been hurt by drunk drivers. I've been working with the Victim Impact Program, and I'm starting a foundation when I get out. A foundation. The Robert Brooks Foundation for Drunk Driving Prevention. Tyler's voice was steady, but she could see the emotion beneath the surface. I want to use my family's money, what's left of it after the legal settlements, to fund education programs, support victims' families, and provide treatment for people struggling with addiction. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. You want to name it after my father? If you'll let me, he deserves to be remembered. And his death should mean something more than just my punishment. Tyler leaned forward slightly. I've spent 2 years learning about the man I killed, and I know now what the world lost that night. Your father was a teacher, a volunteer, someone who believed in helping people build better lives. I can't bring him back, but maybe I can continue some of his work. The irony wasn't lost on Olivia. Tyler Campbell, the privileged heir who'd destroyed her family, was now proposing to honor her father's memory with the very money that had once protected him from justice. There's something else, Tyler continued. I want you to run it. The foundation. You understand both sides of this tragedy better than anyone, and you've shown more grace through this entire process than I ever deserved. Tyler, I can't. You can. You have a degree in social work now. Thanks to the Victim Compensation Fund, you've been working with families affected by drunk driving for 2 years. You know what they need because you've been where they are? It was true. Olivia had used the money from Gregory Campbell's seized assets to finish college, earning her degree in record time, while volunteering with organizations that supported crime victims. The work had been healing in ways she hadn't expected, giving her purpose beyond her own pain. What would your father think about you giving away his legacy to the daughter of the man you killed? Tyler's laugh was bitter, but not unkind. My father disowned me the day I confessed. He's serving his own prison sentence now, and honestly, I think being cut off from his money and influence was the best thing that ever happened to me. He paused, considering. But even if he approved, it wouldn't matter. This isn't about him anymore. It's about doing what's right. They talked for another hour about the Foundation's mission, about Tyler's plans for after his release, about the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. When visiting time ended, Olivia found herself reluctant to leave. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they prepared to say goodbye. "Anything. Do you still dream about him? About my father?" Tyler nodded slowly. "Every few months, but they're different now. In the dreams, we talk. He tells me about his family, his students, his hopes for the community, and I tell him about the foundation, about the lives we're saving with the drunk driving prevention programs." Tyler's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "In the dreams, he forgives me. I don't know if the real Robert Brooks would, but the man in my dreams understands that I'm trying to make amends." "I think he would forgive you," Olivia said quietly. That's the kind of man he was. After leaving the prison, Olivia drove to Greenwood Cemetery, where she'd installed a new headstone for her father, using money from the Victim Compensation Fund. The original marker had been simple granite with just his name and dates. The new one told his story. Beloved husband and father, ESL teacher and community volunteer, a man who believed everyone deserved a chance at a better life. She sat in the grass beside the grave, as she had so many times over the past 5 years, and told her father about her conversation with Tyler. "I never thought I'd say this, Dad, but I think Tyler Campbell might be a good man now. Not because he was born that way, but because he chose to become that way." She traced her finger along the headstone's inscription. "He wants to name a foundation after you. He wants to spend his life preventing other families from going through what we did." The October wind rustled through the trees, and Olivia imagined it was her father's response. Robert Brooks had always believed in second chances, in the power of people to change and grow. He dedicated his life to helping immigrants build new identities in America, leaving behind who they'd been to become who they wanted to be. Maybe Tyler Campbell was just another kind of immigrant, leaving behind his old identity as a privileged killer to become someone who saved lives instead of taking them. "I think I'm going to say yes," she told the headstone, "to the foundation, to working with Tyler, to believing that something good can come from something so terrible." She stayed until the sun began to set, watching the light fade across the cemetery. When she finally stood to leave, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced since that terrible October night 5 years ago. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting, or even of forgiving completely, but the peace of knowing that her father's death had finally led to something larger than tragedy. The Robert Brooks Foundation would save lives. Drunk drivers would get treatment instead of prison. Families would be spared the agony of losing someone to preventable violence. Tyler Campbell would spend the rest of his life making amends for one terrible moment, and in doing so, he'd honor the memory of the man he'd killed. It wasn't the justice Olivia had imagined when she'd first started her investigation. It was better. As she walked back to her car, Olivia pulled out her phone and started composing a text to Tyler's lawyer. She had a foundation to build, and there was work to be done. Her father would be proud at the cemetery gates. She paused to look back one more time. "We found justice, Dad," she whispered to the gathering darkness. "It wasn't what we expected, but it was the justice you would have wanted. The kind that heals, instead of just punishes. The kind that saves lives." The wind picked up again, scattering leaves across the path behind her, and Olivia Brooks Morrison drove home to her husband, her future, and the difficult, beautiful work of turning tragedy into hope.